Oh, right.
Or I guess I'm going to be gone.
You ready now? We've already went live.
Oh, have we? Excellent. Excellent.
Check, check.
Okay. Before I walk out, okay.
I'm going to watch Barry across the station.
Yeah, because it's good. So we can do it.
Okay, so what am I doing here?
Nope, we got it all locked up.
Awesome.
from you, the one, two, and that one.
All right, so we're good on video, whatever. You can play the video.
The Sine Institute of Policy and Politics is American University's incubator for policy innovation. We convene leaders in the academic, public, private, nonprofit, and journalism sectors to engage and promote common ground and nonpartisan solutions. In an evolving world, we seize the opportunity to work on the nation's most pressing challenges through collaboration by experts and top scholars in their field with students in research and scholarship. As part of that goal, the Sine Institute leverages American University's location in our nation's capital, the nexus of government and a growing international business center. We connect diverse perspectives from around the country and around the world with our world-class academics and research, experienced practitioners, and the most politically active student body in the U.S. We stand apart through our focus on the role of business and the nonprofit community in public policy, the rise of the importance of economic regions in the United States, and international policy issues. Our focus is to make an immediate impact at the intersection of policy and politics that leads to real and lasting change. Thank you for joining us as we convene, communicate, and collaborate.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending the welcoming event for the Spring 2025 Sine Institute Fellows, co-sponsored by Kennedy Political Union and the AU School of Public Affairs. Please join me in welcoming the director of Kennedy Political Union, Aidan Skids.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Aidan Skids, and I have the honor of serving as the director of the Kennedy Political Union here at American University. We're thrilled to be co-sponsoring this incredible event with the Sine Institute of Policy and Politics. We are so excited to have you all with us for what promises to be a truly inspiring and thought-provoking discussion. Our event today introduces our 2025 Sine Institute Fellows to our campus and shares some of the work that they will do with us this semester. We are fortunate to have with us today a distinguished group of speakers who bring a wide array of expertise, experience, and passion to today's discussion. First, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for today's event, Antoine Sanfuentes, a graduate of American University and an accomplished journalist. Antoine most recently served as the vice president and managing editor for CNN's Washington Bureau, and he oversaw coverage of the White House and Capitol Hill. He is also a distinguished guest lecturer in the School of Communications at AU. Next, we're honored to welcome our panelists, Nadia Murad, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate and a tireless advocate for survivors of genocide and sexual violence. As a Yazidi survivor herself, Nadia has dedicated her life to raising awareness about the atrocities faced by her community and fighting for justice and dignity for victims around the world. Her work continues to inspire and mobilize people everywhere to take action for human rights as she champions her work through her incredible organization, Nadia's Initiative. We're also thrilled to have Sylvia Burwell with us, former Secretary of Health and Human Services, who has played a transformative role in shaping health policy in the United States. Sylvia has worked relentlessly to improve healthcare access with the focus on serving underserved populations and has been a champion for equitable healthcare solutions that can help build a healthier, more just society. We're also so proud that Sylvia served as the 15th president here at American University. And last, but certainly not least, we are joined by Tara Palmeri, an investigative journalist and podcast host, former lead author at Politico Playbook, and former ABC News White House correspondent. Tara now serves as senior political correspondent at Puck News and is known for her hard-hitting reporting on politics and power. Tara has consistently used her platform to uncover critical stories and hold those in positions of authority accountable, making her one of the most respected voices in journalism today. Today's conversation will dive into a wide range of issues, from human rights to healthcare policy to the role of the media, and will surely leave us all with new perspectives and insights on how we can move forward together as a global community. Thank you once again for being here. And without further ado, let's jump into what promises to be a compelling discussion. I'll hand it over to you, Antoine.
Thanks, Aiden. How about I mean, this is a very exciting day, and I am honored to be here. When I look at what Sine represents and what these seminars will address, when we think about the nation's most pressing challenges, I think about leadership, I think about courage, and I think about accountability, and these three women here today represent all of that. Before we get started with the question and answer, I'd like for each fellow to talk about their seminars and why you should come and participate, because they will be awfully exciting. And Nadia, I'd like to start with you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be back at AU, not as a student this time, but I still have homework to prepare for my seminars. But I'm really grateful, as always, for the opportunity to share my work and my journey with the young students and faculty and staff and everyone here. I spent about 3.5 years at AU, but I didn't get to share much of my story and my work because I just wanted to be a student, because my life outside of the university was all work and advocating and bringing projects to survivors and communities in Iraq and other places and traveling. So I wanted my time at AU to be just, a student, and but I was, I couldn't control, and I still shared my story sometimes with small groups of students and professors. But throughout the semester, we will have some really great discussions. First, talking about my story, the power of personal stories, and how personal stories can drive change, and sharing my journey of surviving violence and war, and how I went from that to use my story and my voice to advocate for others, especially survivors of rape during conflicts. As you know, there are so many conflicts going on right now in the world, and a lot of the times we pay attention to the lives lost, buildings destroyed, as we should, but it's also important to know who is paying the highest price, which is mostly women and children, and women specifically who have been raped and abused throughout history, and a lot of them have not been able to share their stories. When I survived ISIS captivity, I grew up in a very small, remote village in Iraq, even though I went to school, but I didn't have a lot of resources. I didn't know much about the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war. So after moving out of Iraq to Germany, I met so many survivors from all around the world who have the same experience as mine. Very few of them have been able to publicly share their stories because of the shame and stigma that is attached to rape. And that is another topic that we will be covering, how to avoid re-traumatization and stigma and shame, because a very simple question can re-traumatize survivors. And that is something that I've been working on a lot, based on my conversations with my fellow survivors, whom a lot of them have stopped sharing their stories because of the way that they were asked about their stories over and over again. And we will also be talking about who can influence the end of conflict-related sexual violence. You know, every time when there is a war, there are clear signs that conflict is going to be used as a weapon against the specific communities. And ISIS and like-minded groups have always known that, you know, they will not stay forever in these countries and communities that they attack, but they always look for something, a mark, you know, a permanent mark as their legacy, and that is always through rape, because they know that raping the women and girls of a community, you really leave a whole community or generations from that community traumatized, and that is how they did it when they came. They forced women to bear children of ISIS fighters, and that is something, it's so common among survivors. Where I was in Ukraine, you know, not a long time ago, in Kosovo, survivors of more than 2 decades ago, you know, survivors of Boko Haram. So there's so much that women and girls have endured throughout the history and in these conflicts, and there's very little attention and information about that. So I hope to be able to share my story, and that you can learn the stories of so many other women and girls through my story, and how we can help and put an end to the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war.
We are so grateful to you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Tara, you're up.
It's hard to follow that.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm a political correspondent. I have been doing political coverage for basically the past 15 years of my life, and it's taken me all over the world, from North Korea, where I stayed in Kim Jong-un's guest house, to Iraq, where I traveled with the Secretary of State. I worked in local news. I covered City Hall in New York. I covered Bill de Blasio, a former fellow. I covered the White House for ABC News, and most recently I have joined a startup, Puck, and we have been making waves and covering people and power and politics. I have a podcast now with Spotify and The Ringer. It's called Somebody's Gotta Win, and it's a lot of real politic talk with insiders who are willing to really talk about how the sausage is made, what happens in Washington, and how it affects us outside of DC, and I covered the Trump campaign very closely this past election, and it was really something to see. And I think after all of it, this is a really good opportunity to do an autopsy, you could say, on the 2024 election. The DNC just had its winter meeting, and they nominated a new chairman, Ken Martin, and he said that he wants to do an autopsy, and that's the first time that the party's really been willing to do that. They didn't do it in 2016, to really look back and see what they got wrong. And as you can hear, the Democrats are kind of muted right now. I mean, the resistance is sort of futile. I think they're kind of organizing, collecting information, trying to figure out how they're going to be able to combat Trump and his mandate, essentially, and the reason that he won. And they're divided over it. They're divided over why they lost that White House, the Senate, the House. They're divided over the message moving forward. And I think to kind of understand the path forward, we have to look back a little bit. And my guests that I will be having at the seminar, one of them is a congressman from the Philadelphia area, Congressman Brendan Boyle. He's the ranking member on the Budget Committee. he was certainly hoping to be the chairman. He would have been the youngest chairman in history, actually. So he's bummed about that. But he'll be on to talk about Pennsylvania, what happened there, how did Democrats win, and Donald Trump sweeps. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the podcast election, how these podcasters have become more influential than politicians, and like how, you know, should Kamala Harris have done a sit-down interview with Joe Rogan at the end, or maybe embrace that same podcast culture that Donald Trump embraced, and his, you know, refusal to actually talk to the mainstream media and what that meant. And I'm going to talk about Silicon Valley and how it's become red-pilled, and why, you know, we basically have an oligarchy of tech bros sitting behind the president at the inauguration. What does that mean for us? I mean, is Elon Musk overtaking the town, the city, the world? You know, what does that all mean? And I'm actually going to be speaking with my former colleague, Teddy Schleifer at the New York Times. We worked together at Puck, and I've got to say, Teddy has been ahead of this story for a decade. He saw this coming for everybody else. And it'll be really fascinating to talk to him. And, you know, he was starting to hear the gripes from the Peter Thiel types about the Biden administration, about Democrats feeling like, you know, the Me Too movement, the woke culture, the regulations were coming for them. And we're going to talk about that and how this concentration of power, what this means for us. And I hope that this entire seminar series, some of the stuff might be hard to swallow, but I hope that we learn some things from it about both sides of the aisle, and how to move forward, and maybe get to understand each other a little bit. I hope the people that come like really start to open their minds to think about, okay, why did America vote the way it voted in 2024? Where do we think they're going to go in 2026? Because as we know, the pendulum likes to swing in this country, and yeah, I think all of my insiders and my reporting will offer a lot of insight into that. So I hope you all come.
Tara's one of the best, and if ever, now is the time that we need to double down on journalism, demanding transparency, accountability. It's something I teach over as part of the journalism division. Sylvia, let's get to you. I would like to thank you for your leadership. I'd like to echo what Aidan said. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm thrilled to be here with Nadia and Tara. And to answer the question, why should you come to my seminar? It's because my seminar is called From Dolly Parton to Shabuzi is the 9 to 5 over, and it may be the only possible class at AU where you could hear the bar song. So I think that answers the question in the short form. In the longer form, the seminar is about the question, it's related to some of the issues that Tara will be talking about, of has there been, or are we in the middle of a political realignment? And so that question, and why I find that question interesting, is because I've always believed in all the roles that I've had, and whether it was HHS and a number of years ago when we were kind of in the same place, and I assured people that the ACA would not be overthrown because the substance was right. And I believe we got to get ourselves to the substance of what the American people are caring about and voting on. The question of a realignment is, are people voting on something different than they historically have been, and why? And are the parties representing things differently? So that's the question that we're going to examine in the seminar, and I think it's an incredibly important one, obviously very related to the topics. And starting with this substantive issue. The title, you're like, did you just do the title so people come? No, it actually has meaning to it. My hypothesis going into the seminar, and the seminar is going to be a learning experience, I think, for us all. That's the intentionality of the seminar, is to actually learn and try and answer these questions. And so the issues that I believe that there are two issues that we'll end up kind of focusing on. And one is economics and the economy, and the other is culture. So the 9 to 5, for those of you who are not familiar with Shabuzi, and I can see some who might not be, or maybe everyone is, but as you know in the song, he says, this 9 to 5 ain't working. Mm-hmm. And as we, and it was also about buying something very expensive, which to me also we can have a whole conversation about trade and questions of consumerism and how that may relate to these issues. So I think the title was about bringing in questions of economics and also questions of culture and race. For those, I think most folks know Shabuzi and did very well in the Grammys, and we saw some things in the Grammys we hadn't seen before. And with Beyonce's win, you see black artists breaking into country in a way that hadn't happened. So culture and economics, that's what the title's about. It wasn't just that I was hoping that it would encourage people to come. It is actually related to what I believe are some of the substantive things. In the 3 sessions, just so you get a sense, the first session, we're going to have actually one of our own at AU, Liz Suhay, will be doing, helping with the definition of a realignment. What is it? When has it happened in this country? What does it look like? How do you define it? We'll be having a dialogue and conversation about that. And then in the next 2 sessions, we will probably examine, just as Sine does, from one perspective, from the Democratic perspective, and I hope to have guest speakers to do that. What do you think the voters are voting on, and what do you think your party represents? And then from the Republican perspective. So hopefully we'll make some good progress on the substance of these important questions and understand why and what are people voting on, and what is it that they're seeing that their government is or isn't doing. And how do you think about getting to substantive solutions, which is what so many students at AU work on in one form or another, from the business school to the law school to the School of Communications, all around this university in terms of people who are change makers who actually want to work on substantive issues. And this will hopefully bring some of the substantive issues that the American people care about most to the fore in a form of dialogue and conversation.
Fantastic. I'm going to stay with you because I know I want you to talk. You've been at the Nexus. Let me start with that. Having worked at the OMB, or running OMB, HHS, there is a lot happening right now in Washington. It feels like whiplash. I feel like you have a certain expertise to sort of break it down for us and explain it. But what are we witnessing right now? What do you see happening? And let me ask this question. Are we even barreling towards a constitutional crisis?
That's a large question. And the answer is, I'm not sure about the barreling towards. But I think, and this is kind of how I think about most of the work, is grounding oneself back in substance and policy. So let's just start maybe with OMB. And let's start with the idea that we are overspending. We have a very large deficit and debt, and that the interest payments on our debt are the largest as a percentage of the GDP that I think we've ever seen as a nation, except following wartime. I haven't looked at that, but I would bet that's the case. So is there an issue and a problem around spending? And the question of spending versus revenues. Is there a problem around that? Yes. There are people who disagree on that question. Larry Summers, one of my own old colleagues, kind of came to debt and deficits not as important. But I think many people still believe it's a very important issue. And so the question of, how do you go about resolving that issue? And some may shut down parts of organizations, different ways and approaches. But this gets to, I think, a part of your question, which is from a budget perspective, the answer is where all the spending is. In the budget, there's discretionary spending and non-discretionary spending. The non-discretionary spending we all call entitlements. That's things like Medicaid, Medicare, actually the subsidies for the Affordable Care Act fall into that category. Things like certain types of other help in housing or in food. Those all fall into those categories. But the 2 biggest buckets of spending here, and then there's discretionary spending. Discretionary spending falls into the category of funding the Defense Department, and there's funding the State Department, there's funding USAID, there's funding all the departments, education, all of those things. That's discretionary spending. But the big numbers saw on the entitlement side. If you're going to get, if you're going to work on these problems, your real answers. And that doesn't mean you can't be more efficient in government. And I want to be clear, as the former director of OMB, I can give you 5 places to go. that should be run better and that sort of thing. But the big money and the way to change this picture actually has to do with entitlements and whether or not you're willing to change payments to health care or Social Security. That's where the big dollars. And so I think getting the conversations framed around what are the substance of the issues will help us as a public as we go through this time period. And that's one of the things that I hope, that's part of why the seminar is focused as it is, to get to some of these substantive issues. But I think there are fundamental questions of the power of the executive branch and the power of the legislative branch, the power of the purse. It is the only thing that the United States Congress is required to do on an annual basis, is pass a budget. And so the question of how all this interacts is something that I think we're going to see unfold.
Buckle up. Buckle up. Tara, is there any bipartisanship left in Washington? You cover this every single day. Why don't you talk about how you're covering both sides and the challenges?
Well, I think that the members that are willing to be bipartisan, on the left at least, and on the right, they're reflecting their own districts, right? Like, they might be a Republican in a D+, 5 district, or a Democrat in an R+5 district. So they are kind of forced to be bipartisan, just reflecting their own constituents, right? But for the most part, these people, they can be primaried if the powers that be, now the Republican Party under Trump, decides, hey, if you're going to vote against us, we're just going to find some wackadoo on the right and he'll win the party primary. Doesn't mean they'll actually win the general election. They can end up flipping that seat over to the Democrats, which is essentially what the Democrats are hoping for. But that's the real threat of bipartisanship. I mean, when they're playing these games of we're just going to primary you out, and you're seeing, Trump's henchmen like Elon Musk, his former chief of staff on the campaign, his campaign manager, Chris LaCivita, saying the same thing. They're willing to go after these guys. Some of them are so far right that they're, debt hawks, and they just say, go for it. I'm safe in my district, but there are very few of them. I think right now, though, Democrats are sort of being careful about when to speak up and when to attack Trump, because they realize that he did have a mandate. I mean, he won the popular vote. And they know that some of the issues that he won the popular vote on were very popular across the board, like 60% of the country, more than 60% of the country think immigration is a problem, right? So you see Democrats like John Fetterman co-sponsoring the Laken-Riley Act. And before that, he did that in the last Congress. But in this Congress, you had a handful of Democrats join him and vote alongside, cross party lines and vote for the Laken-Riley Act. In the last Congress, he couldn't get a single Democrat to join him. So things have changed, and people realize that, and they're reflecting that in their votes. I think that, from my sources on the Hill in Senate leadership, I've asked them, what are you guys going to do? I mean, I can barely hear a word out of you when Donald Trump is pretty much taking a wrecking ball to the government, and they're saying, just sit back, watch, let him cause chaos. If there's one thing that people did not like about Donald Trump, it was the chaos. And part of the reason that Biden was elected in 2020 was this need for a return to normalcy. So they're just hoping that there'll be a lot of self-inflicted wounds because of how haphazardly he's carrying out his agenda. So I think that that's part of it. And they just keep going back to the price of eggs. I mean, I know it's so corny, but maybe it works. Like talking about the stock market, not everybody owns stocks, right? But if there's one thing that Donald Trump promised was that he was going to lower inflation, he was going to make grocery prices more affordable. But if the Democrats can keep pointing to the fact that the price of eggs are going up, maybe that will break through, because that's a kitchen table issue. At the same time, Republicans are going to try to use wedge issues against them, more fringe issues like on trans rights, because they know that the left of the party, they can't alienate the left of the party by trying to squirm on that. I mean, it's a tough time, and I think it's a regrouping time. And this is a time when leaders are made in a party. It happened for the Republicans after Obama won. They don't have an obvious leader right now. They voted for Ken Martin for DNC chair. but I can't really see, he's not going to be he's just going to be a voice, he's going to raise some money, he's going to do some strategy, but they don't have someone who is the person moving forward. Some people say maybe it's Kamala Harris. She dropped into their winter meeting and people were kind of excited. Some people were excited, some people said, we got to move on from her. Could it be J.B. Pritzker? You know, could it be Josh Shapiro, Gretchen Whitmer? Nobody really knows. So this is a good time for those governors who can show that they can govern, that they can offer normalcy to step up. But in the meantime, I'm not sure who those leaders are on the Hill.
Former Sine Fellow, Wes Bush.
Oh, right, Wes Moore. How could I forget?
Moore, I'm sorry, Wes Moore.
Yeah,
Wes
I was like, how
Bush
could I
also
forget?
an affiliated issue, but Wes Moore, a former Sine Fellow.
Yeah.
If you're looking.
That
We
would
have lots of Wes's.
Yeah,
that's
he's
part, but
definitely a-
Wes Moore, maybe the
Yeah.
Sine Fellow, may be the
It
answer.
sounds like a terrific opportunity for Democrats in the next 4 years. And while all of this is playing out at home, of course, and the president's foreign policy is shifting, American foreign policy around the world has played a vital role. And you as a survivor, why don't you talk about your experience and how did you say strong? And I want you to also talk about, you came up with a code, the Murad code, and talk about that and how you're using that to help other women.
Well, I think with the U.S. support, I believe that U.S. has a responsibility in the countries like Iraq where they have had a long history to support minorities and women and children. And we have been, through my organization, I've been working with, I've worked with both administrations and we need their support. And it's so important to know if, with the U.S. humanitarian aid that there are people who are in desperate need. And I know, personally, people who have been reaching out to us in the past few days asking us if this is going to impact them, the support that they're receiving, a lot of displaced people, a lot of widows, survivors that we have been trying to work with them. And, countries like Iraq, for example, Iraq is not a poor country. It is a rich country, but you have minorities who don't have any access to the resources that the government has. So the U.S. support is so important for minorities, for women and children, and for survivors. I think for me, surviving ISIS captivity was something that it also came with a responsibility to share my story with the world because I was one of the lucky ones that survived. Thousands of women and girls that were with me didn't make it. My own nieces who were younger than me were taken into captivity and then we were separated and they both were killed. And I feel like I owe it to them to tell the world about their stories. All young girls who had, their whole life ahead of them and wanted to also be students and go to college. So I feel responsible every day. I take my survival as a responsibility to tell the world about all these women and girls that are in captivity, whether in Iraq or in other parts of the world. But I think one thing that helped me a lot was just being hopeful all the time. My village was surrounded by ISIS for 2 weeks. We had our phones and we were calling the world leaders and saying, they have given us two options. We either convert or they will kill us, help us. But our own government and the international community left us alone. And I witnessed the murder of my 6 brothers, my mother, my cousins, my neighbors. And 10 years later, like so many other survivors, I have been advocating every single day to get the remains of my loved ones back and for their remains to be identified and buried. And I think that's the least that our government and the international community can do for us. But as when I survived in ISIS captivity, before that, I've never heard of the UN, the media. I never met a journalist in my life or camera or anything. I didn't know where to begin, but I knew that I had a story and that I wanted to share it with the world. and I was displaced with some of my family members in a camp that I was surrounded by 12,000 people. I didn't have the privacy to deal with my own trauma, to heal and recover. I didn't have enough support. And when people were coming to the camps looking for survivors, a lot of the times I didn't know what happened to my story. Sometimes we will tell them, please don't share our real names or faces because we have loved ones in captivity, but the next hour we will be all over. So the way that we were treated as survivors of rape and the way that people will come to us and sometimes I couldn't tell the difference between an aid worker and a journalist. And I thought that I had to give my story to get some food. But it was not, the humanitarian aid that was coming into the camps, I didn't know that I can have it without giving something. And that's where I worked on the Murad Code with the UK government. And Murad Code it's something that I didn't have it when I first shared my story, but it's right now being shared with survivors in many different countries. And it's very easy, for journalists, prosecutors, investigators to, when they are on their way, for example, to meet a survivor, to read and prepare for that interview. And it just prepared them better to avoid re-traumatizing survivors. But it's also something that it's in survivors' language. When I was in Ukraine, for example, survivors have printed the code into small cards, and they were holding the card saying that I know what to say and what not to say. And it's really important. And the way, governments, for example, can support it, it's also so important. So when a government signed on the code, the Canadian government, for example, was one of the first governments to support the code. They will ask the journalists or organizations or anyone that they are supporting as a government, they would say, I'm supporting you financially, you have to use this code to make sure that you put survivors' well-being first and you avoid any questions that you think it's going to harm them. So that has worked and helped so many survivors. But of course, there are many survivors who also cannot read and write. So even with this code, they don't know what are their rights, and we have to go and talk to them. And that's where we built a first ever women's center in Sinjar, Iraq, where we bring women and girls who have never been to school and tell them about how they can share their story and with whom, and how they can just say no sometimes to questions. But I learned that the hard way after I gave my story over and over again, that I came up with this code.
Thank you for sharing that. I think about, the role that we play, and I've seen conflict. I've covered refugees. I've been in places like Congo and Darfur, and I've seen the power of the kind of work that you are responsible for, and it has great impact. Sylvia, let's talk about a line we hear in this town: doing the right thing, working on bipartisan deals. Talk about how this works when two sides come together, and talk about a time that you worked on something that you're proud of.
Why don't I do a budget-related one in terms of a deal and a bipartisan deal, and how you can make things work and how you can get things done, and some of the key elements that help you get there. So the situation is I've been nominated to be the director of the Office of Management and Budget. I'm coming into the Obama second term, and there's something called the sequester, which has been put in place. And the basics of the sequester are, if we can't get a deal and figure out how to cut some stuff, and we're going to have a commission that's going to make recommendations, a bipartisan commission is going to make some recommendations, but if this stuff doesn't get passed or put in place, cuts will be automatic. So that's the basics of the story. I walk in, And the sequester has just come into place. And the sequester, actually, it cuts across everything. It's discretionary as well as non-defense discretionary, as well as entitlements in terms of cuts coming out of Medicare in terms of payments to doctors and other forms of what will happen. So it's happening, it's damaging people's health coverage, it's damaging jobs, it's damaging a number of things, but it is in place. And it was done in order to get a deal. That's why everybody agreed to it. It was a let's push the problem off, which you understand, in order to try and get a deal. So come into that situation and have to get out of that. Clearly we got to get out of that, and the first thing is we actually have to get a budget for that current year. So in order to do that, this bipartisan concept is important, and so I come back. I'm actually at that point confirmed 96-0. Which, in terms of the bipartisan stuff, and I had worked across the aisle during the Clinton years. When I had worked in government, I'd worked across the aisle, knew some people and stuff like that, but worked very hard to have bipartisan support. And then I was very fortunate because a House member said he would bring together a group of House Republicans, said he would bring together quietly, no one would know, a group of Republicans that I could meet with to understand. Because in order to do any of these deals, there are a couple keys. One, you got to have the right people negotiating the deal. And what do I mean by that? You have to have people that understand the substance and are trusted by their side so that they can actually represent and negotiate. Because sometimes if you're across the table from someone doesn't actually carry the water and can represent, you negotiate a deal and it doesn't hold. They can't get support. So you need people that understand the substance, you need people that actually represent, and you yourself need an understanding of the substance and an ability to break things down into what are the must-haves substantively, what are the must-haves politically, and what are the nice-to-haves. And you need to understand that from your side, and you need to understand that from the other side, which is why these conversations that I was having, hopefully I was going to get the understanding from our team of our priorities and get a basic agreement. And that's not always easy, I have to say. In an administration, it's not easy. The interests of different parts of the administration are not always aligned, but you've got to get those things in line. And that's what we work to do. And no one believed me, but I was like, the people that are going to cut this deal are Paul Ryan and Patty Murray. And everybody was like, that's wacky. She's like the senator in tennis shoes from Washington State. And, Paul Ryan, and that's not. But I knew them both, and it is about a personality. I knew that they were trusted. I knew, and so you just worked and worked until you could get the deal. You shaped the substance in terms of that, and you keep moving piece by piece. What ends up happening is Ryan and Murray negotiate the deal, and then what follows out of that, and the deal, so we're all clear, we're all talking about it right now, a budget resolution in the top line of the budget. That's what you needed in the deal. That's the substance of that deal. And then you had to get bills. And at that point, then who took the ball? Barbara Mikulski, senator from Maryland, who some of you may have heard of, and a guy named Hal Rogers, a crusty Republican from Pikeville, Kentucky, that area. And the two of them did something that had not happened since the 1980s, which was they put together and passed full omnibus, which means every single appropriations bill. And so this can be done, but there are some elements of it. And relationship, people, and substance are core to moving those things forward. And it becomes much harder in the context that Tara described, which is how people are threatened in terms of it. That creates even more complexity, though.
Were people being threatened at that point, though? I mean, it seems like the days of civility.
So at that point, things had started to change. Tea
Party time?
Tea Party was very, very, very strong. Tea Party was extremely strong, and the phrase "you're going to be Tea Partied" existed at that point in time. And the other thing that was true is in a post-Gingrich world, and so served in that time too. Negotiated with, and Gingrich lot, that group. And that
The
actually
Clip for
is
Growth too was still big then, right?
totally, yes.
Yeah.
So all these things, and this we'll get into as we talk about this realignment question. Your question actually leads into some of the stuff we'll talk about in the seminar. Because the question of a realignment is, when did things start in terms of changes in representation, possibly or not? So hopefully that answers
Yeah,
that
I'm just
question.
curious, how do you apply that now? I mean, are you, with this new White House, are you taking big swings, small swings? How do you get the two sides to the table, given the climate? I imagine it will be very challenging.
Well, it's why I am starting with this seminar. Is I'm obviously not serving in any roles right now, but the step one is the substance and connecting it to the American people. And this is, and whether you're doing problem solving in the private sector, the public sector, or anything, I believe you got to start with your definition of success. And so the definition of success in this context is, how do you represent and fulfill the current needs of the American people that are not being met and continue meeting the needs? And so I think you have to start with substance. And the other thing that I think you have to do is you have to take it piece by piece, problem by problem. I mean, can give you another example of, Fred Upton, 21st Century Cures is a bill that passed that had a lot of elements to it that helped with health and health innovation and that sort of thing. The way that started was I used to have breakfasts at HHS, and they were called the what do we agree on breakfasts. And I invited the ranking and majority of the House and the Senate for all the committees of HHS. And that's like 28 people. And you'd end up with Orrin Hatch sitting beside Rosa DeLauro at breakfast. And so the idea for this came out of these breakfasts. And then he took it out of the committee process. He asked, will you come, and we'll have every member bring someone from their district to speak to these issues in a private room, not in a hearing. So you have to figure out what's the problem, what's the solution space, and figure out new ways to get things done.
So Tara, I read Puck. Your reporting is phenomenal.
Thanks.
How do you operate in this climate of disinformation, misinformation, sort of 5 sources telling you this, 5 other sources telling you that? How do you work it?
Oh, I mean,
ensure that it's
yeah,
right?
I've been doing this for a while at this point, but I think the best sources are the sources that you've known for a long time, you have a trust relationship with. You have to obviously verify them with other sources. I assume everyone I'm speaking to has an agenda, and then the other person I'm speaking to has an agenda. So like, you have to assume that every person who is speaking to you has an agenda, whether it's the agenda is the truth, they're a whistleblower, or the agenda is their own political power, influence. And so, and then there are just some things that are facts, like there are numbers, there are, statistics, there are digits, and even then people try to manipulate them. So it's a confusing time, a confusing world, and especially when you have so many people who are partisans and activists and even politicians that occupy the new media space and present themselves as journalists. And they put information out there that's not accurate, or it's so blatantly partisan, and they say that they are journalists, which journalists should be nonpartisan. I mean, they should be looking for the truth above all, holding power to account. And it's kind of, in a weird way, we're like competing with these people, but it's such a lower standard, you don't want to get in there. And the algorithms favor them, and the incendiary things that they put out, the shock. So you're kind of in this like race with the algorithms, because at the end of the day, like, you do want your information out there. Otherwise, it's like you might as well write a diary entry to yourself. The point of journalism is to get people to learn the information, to make action happen, or just to present the truth. And we're just in some really challenging times. Technology has a lot of power over what is put forward. People have a lot of different agendas, and whoever tells the better story in a better way tends to win the game, whether it's based in truth or not. I mean, when the President of the United States can call legitimate news outlets fake news all the time. I mean, it hurts the credibility of journalists. At the same time, a lot of journalists didn't do themselves a lot of favors in the way that they covered the Trump administration the first time around, and the Biden administration, frankly. So it's hard. There's definitely an issue with credibility, and I think a lot of people are like, well, I'm tired of the mainstream news media in general, and I want to go to independent sources. And there's obviously opportunities there, certainly opportunities for places like Puck, certainly opportunities for people like me, individual brands who, you know, I have a show that Spotify carries and it's on The Ringer and they have their own brands, but ultimately it's me. You know, I'm Tara Palmeri, you're getting the news from me. But you probably don't know what Puck is for the first time. At least when I joined, most people were like, what? What's that? You know, so it's like you had to build your brand at that point. And in some ways that's great because I don't have the brand association of being associated with MSNBC or CNN, and people think, oh, she's so liberal, she's not going to be able to you know, write the story in a fair way, or Fox, where, oh, she's so conservative. It's like, this is who I am. And my goal is always to try to be fair, but some things are just so blatantly obvious. And when you're playing the whataboutism game or both sides games on some issues, it's just like, it's some people just see right through it. I think we need to be like real politic and just say it how it is. And people might not agree, but the comment section has become the news in so many ways. And I don't know that that's good for society. Both sides are terrifying. Like I go on X and it has become a cesspool for the right. I go on Blue Sky, it is also a cesspool for the left. Like I don't know where the sane people are hanging out, but it's scary on the internet, I can tell you that.
I do think it's important for, you know, we all sort of seek our trusted sources. It can be one reporter, it can be one news organization, but it comes down to what sense you have of their experience and the information they report. I think that's the new world we live in.
Yeah.
And of course, the world is going through lots of change. I think, Nadia, in your sort of quest to sort of bring awareness, what message do you have for young people, you know, beyond the information wars here, to sort of promote change and bring awareness? How do you work with young people?
Well, I think I always tell them to just never doubt the power of your voice. When I started, when, you know, I was attacked, I was only 21, and I started everything at that age. And sometimes, you know, it's okay not to know everything. And as I said before, I didn't know where to start and who to talk to, but I knew one thing, and I knew my story, and that it was important to share it. And I think for, you know, during my time at AU, it was just one of you know, universities are one of those places where you're just surrounded by many different people, and you can learn so much from them, and different perspectives, backgrounds, and people that have different stories. And I'm a very proud sociologist, but I'm also like the stories that I took with me from IU, I think will always just make me come back to IU because of the power of stories, and how people here were trying to make a change based on the other stories that they heard. You know, a lot of students come, they come fresh from high school, and they look at their phone, and sometimes you think that you can't do anything, and that it's all out of hand, out of control. But believe me, there are so many people out there that need you, and you can make a difference. If I could do it, I have no doubt that you can do it too, and you can do it even better.
Fantastic. Sylvia, how important is it to seek out differing opinions and perspective? You talk about, you know, the common ground and bringing people together.
I think it's extremely important to get to right answers. In terms of understanding, and that doesn't mean agreeing. But generally speaking, I just think that whatever field you're in or whatever you're working on, that understanding different perspectives can advance the way you think about answers and solutions to problems, that it's important to see something from different ways, because that's the other thing, is knowing that whoever you are, and no matter how broad your experiences have been, you don't understand from a different perspective. And so at a minimum, it's extremely important to hear that, so that you can get to the right answers. And that doesn't mean agreeing with it. It means hearing it and really listening. Is there something in there that you actually understand or agree with? And what does that mean for how you pursue what you believe to be the path forward?
Terrific. I think we have time for a few questions from the audience. This is your turn.
I know you have questions. Okay, we have some of our KP students helping us. Just raise your hand high so they can find you.
Hi, this is specifically for Nadia. So I just wanted to ask, like, given the attitude of withdrawal that the United States has taken about, like, Middle Eastern affairs and, like, everything going on with the world, like dismantling USAID, I just wanted to ask, how do you imagine playing a role from here? How do you imagine Nadia's initiative to continue making an impact in Iraq and Sinjar to redevelop following the traumatization that it's faced and other regions, like similar regions, and again, like around the world?
Thank you so much. Well, I think it's so important for me to go back and talk to them. I believe that they are looking at the work of the USAID in a very broad way, like they don't see the impact of their work on small communities and minorities and women and children. I think it's really important that we talk and have that conversation, and I was able to do that with, Trump's previous administration, and we got support from USAID back then for a small village for a lot of women who lost their husbands and were taking care of a lot of children, and they didn't have anything to be able to rebuild their houses, so we were able to get support. But in Iraq, you have to go to so many different offices to get permissions, and we were not able to get all the permissions before this administration came. So now the project is stopped, and we have been receiving a lot of calls, women calling that we should talk to them and say this is a different, U.S. support for minority is different. And the Middle East in general is going through so much. I cannot tell you that, we can do something for Yazidis and make them safe and rebuild, because everywhere in the Middle East is connected, and you cannot have a perfect place for Yazidis when Iraq is going through so much and have so many displaced people on the border with other countries that are going through war. So the U.S. cannot just step back and say, yeah, I have done it, or things have gone wrong. And especially, as I said, U.S. impact on Iraq's security and stability in the past 2 decades it's huge, and they cannot just move out of Iraq and turn their back onto minorities. So I think what we need to do right now is go and talk to them. I have met the foreign minister before, and I've explained the situation of minorities in Iraq, and I'll be happy to go back there again. And I think that's what we need. We don't, as Sylvia said, we don't have to always agree with policies or people in power, but I don't think you will ever be able to achieve what you want if you only go to people that agree with you.
I think we can have time for one more question. Quick question. Anybody? Right here.
I also have a question for you, Nadia. So in my experience, I don't think that many people realize that fundamentally rape is about power and who controls power. And war is already a time when the balance of power is very, very skewed, and the brunt of those consequences falls on women and children. when you spoke about having to re-traumatize yourself to gain access to basic necessities, it made me realize how little people know about the real power dynamics of rape as a weapon in war. So how can we as a society become more compassionate towards survivors and change our attitude towards this?
You know, one thing that I've struggled with in the past 10 years is people only see me based on what happened to me. And I've been, you know, I have explained myself so many times that before 2014, I had a family. I loved my family. You know, my mom was a single mother, raised 11 children on a small farm, never went to school. But I had a life. I went to school as the first one in my family to attend high school. And sometimes it's hard to explain to people that, because I have had a story, and sometimes that story defines who I am right now. But there's so much more that we can learn about survivors, their lives before, and how, you know, it's just so important to recognize their full humanity, and that they're not just a story, but they have so much more that they can give and contribute. And right now, you know, from my meetings and conversations with survivors from Congo to Sudan to Iraq, they're contributing to their communities. They are the ones that are giving their testimonies over and over again to see perpetrators in courtroom. They are the ones that are going to the governments and telling them enough to stigmatize us, you know, to blame us for what happened to us. So I think it's just one thing that we can do for them is to recognize their full humanity. And I see some familiar faces here that were my classmates, and you know, I didn't share my story in most of my classes because I was worried sometimes that if they knew about me every time I give my opinion about a reading or a video, that I will be judged as someone who has experienced that. But I think it's, for me, I was also, and I've been able to give something to the world, that yes, I was taken as a sex slave, but I also survived, and I also have something to give to the world. But I also, at the end of the day, I'm a human being, that I have a life, and I should be also recognized for that.
I think that's an incredible place to stop. I wish we had time for more questions, but guess what the best part is? They're here all semester. You can come to their seminars and ask them more questions. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you all so much. I'm Amy Dacey. I'm the Executive Director of the Sine Institute. I want to thank you so much for joining us today and for being part of such a thoughtful and impactful discussion. It's been an honor to hear from our incredible panelists. By the way, are we Eagles all the way? We have 3 alum and a former president. Sine's bringing the Eagles to the program, okay? They're just incredible, and they're engaging in dialogue throughout the semester on important issues on human rights and healthcare and social justice and politics and realignment and the role of media. So please join them. As a wrap-up, I want to take a moment to reflect on the work of the Sine Institute. It's committed to fostering open and inclusive conversations on the most pressing challenges of our time. Through our programming, we bring together leaders and advocates and change makers from all over and all walks of life and from all perspectives of the conversation. Today's panel was a perfect example of that, in bringing together people whose work has made a real difference, both here and around the world. We're driven by the belief that informed and engaged citizens are key to building a democracy that works for everyone. And we're so proud to bring that work to you. We're so excited to have another new group of fellows. We're grateful to our panelists, Antoine, Nadia, Sylvia. Thank you so much for your time. We look forward to you being part with us the rest of the semester. You know I'm going to be calling you to engage more with us at Sine, so don't worry about that as well. But thanks for sharing your expertise and your perspectives. I also want to thank so much, Aiden, you did a wonderful job, and thank you to the team, KPU. You're incredible partners in everything that we do at AU. We love working with KPU, so thank you. and also for the School of Public Affairs, who also helped co-sponsor this event. Another thing that I will say is, you know, we get together, it lasts an hour, it's engaging, we have so much enjoyment. Months and months and months went into creating this event for you today. So can we please thank the Sine Institute staff, our student associates, and also our student advisory group. Just raise your hand if you're a part of that team. I want to thank you guys so, so much. You're an incredible group of students, and I know we have some alumni from the program too. I want to thank you for being here. We like to say at Sine, what matters most is what we do when we leave the room, right? So this was important gathering today. So go up and sign up for more seminars. Get involved. Join the certificate leadership program that we have offered this semester. Tell your friends about the conversation we're having and invite them to come in. Challenge others to have this conversation about some of the issues that we care about. We want to convene, communicate, and collaborate. I want to thank the faculty that are here today and some of the leadership at AU. I personally want to thank very much Vicki Wilkins, who has been just a constant mentor and friend to me for the Sine program since we started, so thank you. But there's other leaders like Matt and Michelle and, you know, others that are here. I just wanted to say, if you're asking the question, why should I go to these seminars? I want to tell you something. I've spent a lot of years with Sylvia, but I've spent time with these women over the last several months, and I'm a different person. I see things differently. I'm a better person for knowing them. So come join us the rest of the semester, but first, please join us for a reception. Come and have some food, talk about what you learned today, and sign up for more seminars. We thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you so much. Thank you.